So the first thing you should do before you watch this video is go to your SAQ, turn it in, as it's submitted in Schoology, and look and see with the rubric how many points you got for each one. So for 1A, 1B, 1C, did you get 3, 2, 1, or 0? So you need to look at that, and you should open that up in a window, perhaps next to this window, and then come back to the video. Remember, for each point, you must answer all parts of the question, support your answer, and explain how your example illustrates your answer. So on the AP exam, each part is worth 1 point. You either get the point or you don't get the point. For purposes of this class, I give myself a little more gradation in between. So if you got 3 points, it means it's a good job. It's a point on the AP exam. You're going to get the point. 2 points, I think, well, you might get the point. think it's a little soft in one area, a little weak. Maybe I'm not sure if the concrete detail would support. So if you get a 2 or 3, you should be very hopeful. You should go like, I'm in a good target range. If you get 1 point, it means you wouldn't have gotten the point, but there's something there. I'm kind of having to squint a little to make it worth something. And 0 means you maybe misunderstood the question or didn't answer it. So for each of these, you should, and not all students did this, you write A, B, C, and I'm going to give you student examples in a moment. So the first one says, one common trait in the policies of 2 of these European nations. So understand it's one common trait, not I'm going to pick England and France and give multiple common traits. Past one common trait, it does not help, it just detracts. So you might have written multiple sentences and think, well, I've covered it well, but you've gone past one common trait and supporting that one common trait. And then it has to be about policies. Most of you did well on this, but for instance, it couldn't be about disease. They brought disease because that's not a policy. And then you have to pick 2, and most of you did this. You did 2 of the England, France, or Spain rather than trying to do all 3 or just talk about European nations. So most of you did a fine job on this. Now, mistakes would be if you make it too general and don't support, or too simplistic, like they tried to be friendly. That's not bad, but you have to support it now with evidence. And then, of course, I say saying lots of stuff hoping some of it fits into the question. I hope that the reader will figure out what I mean by, hey, I know stuff. So I list down here some acceptable answers. I'll let you kind of read along. Faith, trade, intermarriage, etc. But you need to focus on what's in common. And so don't drift if at some point you start going like, well, they have this in common, but this not in common. That's not part of the question. So here are some examples actually taken from the student essays that were just done. One common trait in the policies of England and Spain was that they wanted to convert the Native Americans to Christianity. The Spanish conquistadors thought it was their moral obligation to force the natives to convert in their Roman Catholic mission. And they utilized the encomienda technique, in which they gave enslaved people to colonists in exchange for them to Christianize the nations. Now that first part, so it's not just they wanted to Christianize, but it gives concrete detail. Roman Catholic for Spanish, that may seem self-evident. Missions out here, it feels really obvious to us about Spanish missions out here in San Diego. But and then, of course, encomienda. Now, this one is borderline, but I think it would work because all it says for English is they also wanted to spread their beliefs. So really, to be rock solid, this one should also give examples of how the English, something about Puritan interaction with Native Americans and how they wanted to spread their ideas. Then the next one, A, and again, this is how you should listen, not one big paragraph. A is its own thing, then you go to B. One common trait in the policies of France and Spain was that they established kinship relationships with the Native Americans because French and Spanish colonizers were mostly men. Many of them were intermarried with the natives to keep their trade relations between them stable. That borderline, but this really makes it strong. Their intermarried relationship led to the development of the terms mestizos. So that's the part that really, strengthens it. Now, next one is one difference between the policies. Now, what sometimes people say, like if you look in the middle, false contrast, you can't say what one nation does and then say, but the other nation didn't do that. That doesn't actually show the difference. You have to show the difference by talking about each nation separately and what they did. Most people did okay on this one. Here's an example. A key difference between the policies was that the French saw Native Americans as allies, while the Spanish conquered and enslaved them. The French saw Native Americans as partners, allying with them in the 7 Years' War and trading various goods like pure. That's perfect. You got fur, 7 Years' War to support the idea that they had friendly relations. And then as you go on, we have encomienda here, and we have the harsh agricultural labor and forced tribute. So it's talking about both the Spanish and the French and providing concrete detail to support. Next one is, this is the one, by the way, most students did the best on, one reaction of the Native Americans. You could say the first one is Pontiac's Rebellion. The second is Pope's Rebellion of the Pueblo people, concrete reaction and how they responded. This was probably the easiest point of them, or you had to know stuff, but these are the ones students were most successful with. Question 2, this is the one students most struggled with. If the towns of Manchester and Birmingham, those are English towns, sending no representatives to Parliament, are notwithstanding their represented, why are not the cities of Albany and Boston equally represented in that assembly? Are they not Englishmen? You have to look to where it says member of British Parliament, because then it says at the top, go back to the quote, or are they only Englishmen when they solicit for protection, but not Englishmen when taxes are required to enable this country to protect them? So what he's doing is he is saying, hey, colonists, quit your whining, you hypocrites. What are you doing saying like, you're just like Manchester and Birmingham. They don't get special representation. Or do you only claim it when you get something, money, but not when you have to give something back? And so he's not sympathetic to the colonists. He's telling the colonists to pipe down. So here's an example. A member of Parliament, Soam Jones, explains how the colonies are being hypocritical. When they're in need of protection, such as the French anymore, the British provide them with it when Britain asks for taxes. So that's the point. I have B, that's something that it should be A because it's the response to the same thing. So it should say A. Defends virtual representation. I love this, and saying that the English colonies have the same representation as English towns. And so, again, concrete, detail, specific, and understand it. Now, this was a hard one. If you didn't get this point, I kind of get it. It's a stretch because he's being sort of sarcastic, and that's maybe hard to pick up. Maybe you didn't know where Manchester was. You weren't sure which side in Parliament. So this was a challenge to do. Again, I think this is the hardest one. Next one, that the petitioners have long concerned in carrying on the trade between this country and the British colonies. From the nature of this trade, so this is B, consisting of British manufacturers exported. I won't continue to read it, but it was so easy for this one because it says London merchants against the Stamp Act. So what was the main point? The London merchants wanted the Stamp Act to go away. Why? Because the colonists were protesting and boycotting, and it was hurting the British trade. So an example you could have given, this is from a student one, the London merchants are arguing against the Stamp Act because there were frequent boycotts about the British imports and exports, with it being common that colonists would refuse to buy British products. The merchants wanted Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act because they were losing profit because of protests, and manufacturers were not able to transfer the goods efficiently. So that's perfect. So C, one action in response. Most people did well in this. The one thing you got to trick up, it's by the British government. It's not the colonist response. It's like, what was the response by the British government to the complaint? And so an example would be an action taken by the British government would be the repeal of the Stamp Act. So this is really good. So this is, I would say, C and the one I mentioned earlier were probably the ones that students got the points pretty well on. Again, I hope you watched all the way to the end, because it doesn't do any good if you don't know why you didn't get the points you need to, because the short answer question on the AP test is worth more than the long essay question. It's worth 20%. It replaced what used to be an essay question, plus it's worth 5% more. So it's real important. And I don't think that they're that difficult. They're really good because it gives you a chance to show what you know, not kind of be tricked with a multiple choice. Well, I knew other stuff, but the test didn't ask me. But on the AP exam, this gives you a lot of latitude. You just have to be focused on what the prompt says. Make sure you have supporting information, concrete detail, and connect and show the connection with what it's asking you to do. And then again, make sure you label it A, B, C, not just one big long paragraph.